Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Monday, November 25th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you. On this episode, we are looking at the very top of this free agent class and making some predictions as to where those players will land in the weeks and months ahead. It's a good thing we're doing this episode today, because the Angels cannot be contained. The Angels refuse to lose November. In fact, I think they're winning November, and that was the advice my grandmother always gave me growing up. She said, you got to win November. That's the most important thing of all. Win November. And look, Perry Manasian, his grandmother probably told him the same thing because he is winning November right now.
I think I tried to look at this in the numbers once and was like, of course there's way too much noise and too many things pointing in different directions to try to look at winning the off season and how you do. The saddest thing about all this is that, and this is, I don't mean to throw any water on the parade here, but the saddest thing is that because of aging and stuff, we're probably looking at a bunch of players that have done cool things that will do less cool things in the future.
Hey, but let's just pretend like that won't be the outcome. Let's think pie in the sky for everyone.
Well, Juan Soto is so young that maybe there is a triple crown season in there. You could see him winning the MVP.
Yeah, I mean, as far as your superstars hitting free agency at a young age, this is the rare 26-year-old who hits like a Hall of Famer and should continue to hit like a Hall of Famer for the duration of whatever contract he gets. And that might be 11 or 12 years. It's going to be a ton of money. We know that. There are a lot of suitors out there that are actually lining up to make big pitches to Juan Soto. And I think there are 4 teams listed on the Athletics Roundtable free agent rankings, all of them sort of clustered in the Northeast, both New York teams, a return to the Nationals, the Phillies all being kind of tied in there. And there's one important thing to think about before we start diving into each individual player. You were looking at teams that seemingly have more money to spend than others. So you put a chart together just looking at 2024 payroll, looking at what's on the books for 2025, and you found a group of teams that we would expect to see generally be pretty active, all with significant room in their budgets to make a splash.
The first 2 columns of numbers, they're going to be different no matter where you look. And I actually don't think it's as important what those numbers say as what the difference is. Because, if you look at even this is Fangraphs, but it's not the luxury tax number that's at the bottom, right? So these numbers are a little bit lower than their luxury tax numbers, and those luxury tax numbers are really going to inform what they do because of aprons and all that. So I wouldn't focus too much on these first 2 numbers, but the difference gives you a sense of which of these teams feels like, according to past established payroll norms, they have money to spend. And the Mets have a whopping $173 million against their last year number. Again, I don't know if they're going to spend $173 million. I don't know that they want to live at $336 million because of all the the tax implications of that are pretty bad up at the upper ends. They're losing draft picks. They're paying one to one tax on all the numbers over that, and it gets a little expensive up there. But I do think they have the most money this offseason, and I think they're going to be the biggest players. That's why I give them Juan Soto.
What a gift.
That's prediction number 1. Christmas gift to the Mets fans. Steal Juan Soto from the Yankees.
It would be the ultimate shifting of the tide, I think. It's just as far as the Mets really saying, hey, look, we are spending money like the flagship franchise in New York now, in the Steve Cohen era, right? To take him from the Yankees especially sends a particular message as far as how much you trust Soto to age. I think his bat will age as well as any player we've seen in free agency in our lifetimes. I believe that. So the dollars don't even matter. So you're giving him to the Mets. I guess the thing that I think about is if Soto leaves, the plan B for the Yankees is some multiplayer combination of guys at or near the top of the board, right? It has to be an aggressive spend on multiple players because you're losing so much from one spot. It's hard to make up for that.
Yeah, and if you look back at that that salary chart, what you'll see is that the Yankees are basically the second team. I know the White Sox have $75 million to spend. They will spend 70 none of those million. And so basically the Yankees, when it says 73 million, that's not a hard number, but I think that you could fit basically 2 or 3 second level free agents in that budget to kind of replace the production of Juan Soto and mix it around. And maybe that's smart on some level. What we saw from the Yankees at times in the postseason was they were a very top-heavy team where, the stars were doing stuff and you were kind of waiting for, Anthony Rizzo to have a big hit or whatever. And so with this kind of a budget, the Yankees could do something better than Anthony Rizzo at first base and get another pitcher and sort of move it around and improve their depth behind Arson Judge right there at the top. So that's what I think is going to happen is that the Mets steal Soto and the Yankees are big players for some of the rest of the players on our list.
So in my choose your own adventure through free agency, I gave Juan Soto back to the Yankees after all this courtship. I think the Yankees decided to say, hey, this is a player that we do want to continue to build around in our franchise, and it's got to be Soto plus, but instead of being Soto plus guys that are also in the top 10 of these free agent rankings, it's going to be taking some smart shots on the bottom half of that round table list that you can find over at The Athletic. There was an interesting blurb in there. Only Aaron Judge has a higher on-base percentage than Soto over the last 3 seasons, and Soto has never had an OBP in the big leagues. It didn't start with a 4. It's just unreal how good he is. Only
and
6
the power
players.
is legit, too. I think you had a part of that note was that only 6 players have hit more homers in the last 3 years.
Yeah, the last 2. So, I mean, the power is phenomenal. Age is right. So I think it's one of the New York teams. Last year, I did this with Will Salmon on the Athletic Baseball Show. Each of our guesses counts in the sense that if either one of us is right, we get credit. So when we split, it's actually to our advantage. Sometimes we'll agree that's to a disadvantage. Last year, Will and I did this for 15 players, top 15 on the board. We got 6 right. We hit 400, So
that's not bad.
That's
combined, though.
Combined.
So
I think
one of you did not hit 400.
I think we were both above the Mendoza line because I think we agreed on a couple we got right.
I mean, we're not in there in these meetings. We're not in the meetings with the ownership where we know what the actual number is. So when we keep flipping over to the salary chart, these are demonstrated numbers of what's happened in the past, that they are looking at an actual number that they know they can spend this year. So we're trying to guess along. I do think in your version of the postseason, and this decision means so much to what happens afterwards, because you heard us talk about the dominoes that are going to happen, right? It's like, the Mets have enough money where maybe they can get Soto and still be players for some other guys. But if the Yankees don't get Soto, they're going to be uber aggressive, I think, on the other guys, and so they're going to be winners of some surprise guys that you necessarily didn't think of that are in the top 10. So, I think that then they become, if they get Juan Soto, they become penny pinchers. And I think in your version of the world, this postseason, maybe they would go and get maybe like a Tanner Scott, get a good reliever and maybe finish with a back end starter, some sort of arm depth, or maybe 2 relievers, in a market that doesn't have great relief options. They could try to, improve the bullpen, because the bullpen was on its last legs last year too. They can't just go into the plan with just Luke Weaver and we'll figure out the rest, So I could see them, Soto and some bullpen arms, and that's their postseason, which is, not maybe uber exciting, but the team got to the World Series, and the idea is we re-rack this with a little bit different pitcher luck, and maybe we work on our fundamentals and we squeeze it out next time. So that does leave Corbin Burnes as somebody that I don't think the Yankees can go get if they get Soto.
I'm not even sure they would go get him if they don't get Soto, like in the Plan B world where Soto goes to the Mets or goes somewhere else. I think the Yankees combination of players begins somewhere just below Corbin Burnes on this list. And the Corbin Burnes story is pretty straightforward, right? The strikeout rate has been dropping each year since it peaked, but He's been very durable. He still shows what looks like near frontline stuff. There are only 10 pitchers who have an ERA below 3 since the start of 2021 with a minimum of 300 innings pitched. So one's a full-time reliever. That's Tyler Rogers, by the way. 2 have moved back into starting roles again after spending a lot of time in the bullpen. That would be Michael King and Ronaldo Lopez. And Corbin Burnes is one of the 7 others, right? One of the others is also available in free agency. We'll talk about him in just a few minutes. So Corbin Burnes back to Baltimore makes a lot of sense to me because this core is still very good.
That's my prediction.
I think this is what everyone thinks is going to happen. I think everyone thinks he's staying in Baltimore. So why are you convinced that the Orioles are going to actually pony up the money? It's probably going to be something in the neighborhood of 7 years and $200+ million. They haven't it's a new ownership group, but this front office hasn't had a chance to spend like this. So do you think it's just pure necessity and like not having a good way to replace Burnes if they end up losing him to someone else?
Yeah, I think that I think it just makes sense for them to push back to some of the days when they actually had a more competitive payroll. Now, if you look at this year versus last year, the Orioles have $4 million to spend on my tracker. I don't think that's how it's going to work. And if you look back to 2016 to 2018, they had top 10 payrolls for those 3 years combined. And I'm not necessarily saying they're going to jump into the top 10 in 1 year, but right now, last year, they were 26th in opening day payroll. According to COTS contracts. So I just kind of think that they are at this point where they're ready to push back into that level. They know that the lineup is pretty good and they have familiarity with Burnes. And I would say that most of that familiarity has been a positive experience for them. In terms of, the analytics of the signing, I don't think any analytics team is super excited about signing a pitcher to 7 years and dropping $245 million on a pitcher. However, if you have to be honest, you have to think, well, the Max Scherzer deal was pretty good. The first Steven Strasburg deal was all right. There have been big pitcher deals. I would say the Garrett Cole deal has been pretty good to the Yankees. And so what you're looking for in these mega deals that work, if you say that Scherzer and Cole are the deals that have worked the best, there are some similarities between Corbin Burnes and Scherzer and Cole in that the injury history has been pretty good for Corbin Burnes, just like with Garrett Cole and with Max Scherzer before that big deal. The strikeout rates have been really solid, and I think all 3 of them have something that is super important for an aging pitcher, which is a plus fastball, like an elite fastball. And, if you're signing someone to a long-term deal and they already have a subpar fastball, there's not that many tricks they can play as they get older. The main trick that a pitcher plays as they get older is, oh, look, I have 10 pitches, like Seth Lugo or whatever, oh, look, I started throwing the cutter 20% of the time. For Corbin Burnes, I know cutter is his primary pitch, but that's his fastball. And it's an elite pitch still. And even if you're saying, oh, the swing strike rate has fallen a little bit, or the strike rate has fallen a little bit, I still think that he has this really good foundation. And he can play the old pitcher tricks on top of that. And I'm sure of this because he throws a sweeper like basically 5 games a year. And whenever it shows up on our little tracker, we're like, well, that looks like a plus sweeper. He doesn't do it. Maybe, I don't know why. Maybe it's too much wear and tear, too many breaking balls, whatever it is. But, at some point, if he does fall below a point, you'll be like, okay, well, now I throw a sweeper too. And I think he has enough touch on breaking balls. He's a guy who's been throwing 3 breaking balls for a while. So he's your breaking ball master. That's another thing he has in common with Max Scherzer. Max Scherzer had like 5 breaking balls. Had a really good touch feel for spin. So I think Corbin Burnes has this great feel for spin. The velo is still good. He has a good health history. I'm giving him all the money. And if I'm giving him all the money, the team that seems like they need him the most are the Orioles. If they lose him and they're trying to buy Max Fried or Jack Flaherty, like they've even done the Jack Flaherty dance. They're not doing that again, Or, I guess I would say in the alternate history of me is I would think they would go hard after Blake Snell if they don't get Corbin Burnes. But I think that there could be a moment in Baltimore where they're like, hey, we used to run middle of the pack payrolls at least. Let's push this a little bit.
Right. And again, new ownership as of last year, probably willing to spend a bit more. I think there's the appetite to actually win, kind of make this core and get all the way through the postseason and actually bring home a World Series as well. Interesting thing about Burnes, too, that I noticed, the velo is holding up well on the cutter. He averaged 95.3 on that pitch in 2024. If you go back to the beginning of this 4-year window I was talking about, 95.2. So
nice.
That's a really good sign. We're not seeing a half tick gone kind of year over year. So I do think he's going to get the bag, deservedly so. I haven't gone to the Mets because, again, it's if the Mets miss on Soto, if Soto stays with the Yankees, in my world, they are going to go make that splash. I think David Stearns knows Corbin Burnes about as well as any front office executive in baseball. And I think if you fortify that rotation with someone like Burnes, who you think is going to age gracefully as you become a powerhouse at developing pitching, you won't sign players like this in the future, but you do need one in the shorter term, sort of keep you at that level of being a perennial contender in the National League. So I do think the Mets, because in my world they're missing out on Soto, get Burnes. I don't think they're going to get them both. So if they get Soto, then I fully buy into your Burnes to Baltimore as a kind of a necessary fit for the Orioles.
You're convincing me a little bit. I don't like this because I've got Willy Adames later on the list, and if the Mets don't get Soto and then they get Corbin Burnes. And they could totally use a Willy Adames. Just bring back the Brewers, Stearns.
That's what he's doing. He's just going to pay the Brewers full price. All the guys that he sought out before, had on his roster, he just wants to reunite with all of them. I don't think there's a page yet for Roki Sasaki over at Fangraphs. Let's get to Sasaki next. We've talked a lot about his skills in the last couple of episodes, so we're not going to go deep into that here. The main takeaway is that the stuff wasn't as good in 2024, even though it was still very good, given his age, given that he's part of, as we learned, the 2025 international bonus pool instead of 2024. That kind of opens up a few more teams. We're actually in agreement into where he fits. I believe you suggested the Padres previously, and it makes so much sense because the universe just works with mischief. And it's not mischief in the sense of something nefarious being done to get him to San Diego. It's that the Padres are at that point where they're going to start feeling the crunch of all the money they spent as those veterans get more and more expensive and they live right by that luxury tax threshold. It's going to become more and more difficult to sustain being a perennially competitive team just because of the passing of Peter Seidler, what seems like a slightly reduced appetite to maintain a payroll like that within the ownership group, TV issues, all of those factors. But Roki Sasaki is like the cheat code because he's not handled like a regular free agent. You're not making a 9-figure outlay. You're getting a guy that can be an ace and be there for a few years and completely manipulate the trajectory of your team, keep you afloat for a few more years. And it makes sense. They've got Darvish. They have the ability to bring a player like this in. So I don't know. I mean, there's 5+ other teams where he actually could go. But the more I think about it, the more I think this is what's going to happen with Sasaki.
Yeah, there's other weird pieces of smoke around it, which is just that, there were these allegations basically put forth in the press conference with Rob Manfred that there's been a handshake deal with the Dodgers, and Manfred had to be like, no, that's not allowed, which is disingenuous because we just found out that the Padres had a handshake deal with a 14-year-old turned out to be 19, and the Padres are not in trouble for the handshake deal.
Yeah, the Padres are the entity that were wrong in that instance, right?
I mean, not
solely, solely, but if you're mad at any one person or people,
they made a handshake deal with like a 13-year-old.
Yeah, right. Let's be more mad at the team than you are at the child in this case.
I guess Manfred can't get in the position where he's like reprimanding the Dodgers for having a handshake deal with Roki Sasaki because, the weird thing is, though, that we have to remember that Roki Sasaki has a posting team and they have some motivations of their own and they're about to lose on this money-wise. But by pushing the posting period, and they're not even doing much, they're just saying we're not going to post him until like January 1 or something, right? By posting him January 1 instead of December 1 or whatever, they get into the next year's money. And so the Dodgers had the most of last year's money, but it was only $2 million they had left in their international signing bonus money. So by pushing the posting period a month or whatever it is, they are now have access to 2025 international bonus pool money. And all of a sudden, the Dodgers go to one of the worst teams with $5 million, and you've got the Padres with that are more among the 6 and 7 million teams. Now, the other team, the posting team, is only getting a fraction of that, but at this point, they've lost so much. It's like, yes, we'd rather have a fraction of 7 million than a fraction of 2 million. So please give us our pennies for this amazing player that might turn out to be your ace. And then, from Roki's standpoint, he doesn't care. He doesn't really care about the money as much. So he could still go to the Dodgers. He probably cares about winning, but also I would assume some level of team fit culture. That sort of stuff. It may actually matter that he idolized Yu Darvish. So that's part of that. Maybe, not everybody wants to join the front runner, the team that just won the World Series. A lot of times they want to be like, no, I want to help a team that hasn't won the World Series win the World Series. Then I'm a legend of my own, and not just the guy who joined on with Shohei to win some World Series along with him, like maybe slay the giant, So you don't know exactly how Roki feels about these things, and nobody almost does. And so it's going to be a surprise wherever he goes, really. But I would guess it's either the Padres or the Dodgers.
Yeah, if you want to say let's split our guesses so we can cover two teams, sure, I would technically change mine to the Dodgers to give us another shot. But I'm buying your narrative as far as Roki to San Diego goes at this point. All right, let's talk about Max Fried for a moment. Now, I see the Dodgers for Max Fried, another Harvard Westlake guy. I think the need for the six-man rotation still keeps them in the market for another starter. I think this is the ongoing problem, right? They've dealt with so many injuries in their group of pitchers that with money not being an object, with all the things the Dodgers do well in run suppression with their defense in particular, I think they are a very good fit. A reunion with Atlanta doesn't seem impossible, but the thing I kind of looked at was the Alex Anthopoulos Braves haven't really spent top dollar re-upping pitchers, right? They got a bit of a bargain trading for and extending Chris Sale, and they signed Strider before he was even arbitration eligible, right? So I don't think their MO is to splash a bunch of money on a free agent guy, even if it's someone they like and someone they're familiar with. So I see Fried going to the Dodgers. I know it's less swing and miss than some of the other top end starters you see, but this seems like a spot where the Dodgers could do well.
Well, Fangraphs right now has the Braves rotation without Max Fried as the second best rotation in baseball. So that's Chris Sale, Ronaldo Lopez, Spencer Schwellenbach, Spencer Strider, and Ian Anderson, Grant Holmes, AJ Smith-Shawver, some sort of grouping there. I could see them actually landing a sort of more back-end guy. Somebody that they think has innings so that they can push the Anderson Holmes Shawver group from 210 innings as they currently have to more 100, 150. So that's what I would see them doing. I don't think they necessarily have the motivation even. And if you're just sort of reading the tea leaves of how they've interacted with their player, like they've had plenty of chance to sign to an extension and didn't. So this one seems to be having a long time sort of, for whatever reason it is, health or whatever. One thing I have noticed, I did read up on this, flexor tendon tears are a precursors to Tommy John. There's a pretty good link there in terms of peer-reviewed research that shows that once you've had the flexor tendon tear, you're more likely to have Tommy John. So, at this point, though, maybe Tommy John's the price of the package, and you sign him to a 5-year deal, and you expect to lose one of those years. That's just, and the Dodgers seem to be okay with that. They're just like, throw another, possibly injured pitcher onto the barbecue, and we hope we have a full plate of food when October comes around. So I could see that happening. I could also see in my worldview, the Yankees have lost out on Soto, and so they're diversifying their investment in their team. And one thing that's kind of cool, having a lefty pitch for you in New York is that the porch there is short for left-handers, and so suppressing lefty power can go a long way. So I think it's important for the Yankees to have lefty starters. I think part of the difficulty for Clark Schmidt getting going is he being a righty and giving up some of those homers over there. So putting Max Fried in this group does mean that maybe Marcus Stroman becomes available in trade just as either a monetary saving device. And maybe I'm just wrong about this one. I could see Fried going any number of places depending on what the actual contract looks like, because he's not going to get the 7 years. He's not going to get the 6 years even. If he's out there asking for 5 and 125, 150, like sort of the advanced Kevin Gossman, Robbie Ray deal, then I think a lot more teams will be interested in him. If he's trying to get over 200 million, there's only going to be a select few of teams. And yes, I think Fried versus Snell is like really everyone's debate that they have. And Fried has the qualifying offer attached to him, so you lose a draft pick. So you give him money, and he's fits in a little bit oft injured, good strikeout rate, nice arsenal. Snell, I think, gets dinged for command in a way he shouldn't. I think he's chosen not to throw in the middle of the zone, and so he's chosen to walk guys. Mm-hmm. And with his strikeout rate, it actually works. He's high stuff, and he has no qualifying pick attached to him. I, personally, would rather have Blake Snell than Max Fried.
Yeah, I think it comes back to a question of, what do you think ages better? Is it Snell's superior stuff with that willingness to maybe miss in places where he doesn't get hurt, which drives up that walk rate, or Fried's superior command? I think you have durability issues with both. If you look at the year-over-year workloads, Fried has made 2 fewer starts in the last 4 seasons than Snell, but he's done that while throwing 62 and a third more innings. And that's been always a knock on Snell, right? His lack of efficiency sometimes limits the duration of his starts. I think we pointed out last year, it's not as bad as you think. He's not under 5 innings as often as people make him out to be. And with Snell, you are talking about a guy that has a 3.15 ERA over the last 4 seasons combined. Fried's in that group of guys below 3. He's one of the pitchers that does fit in there. 2-time Cy Young Award winner, and you've got Snell also being elite at hit suppression. I think that's a trait that both of these players have. I think they're both good at avoiding damage. So it really is.
I like that nice fastball for Snell. I don't think that Fried's fastball is that great. I think he's already on the, you've seen it already in Atlanta, cutter, sinker, four seam. He's trying everything, and he's diversifying. Snell actually has a small arsenal. It's a lot of times a 3-pitch arsenal. But he has thrown the slider and has been good enough with the slider in the past that I actually think that can be a pitch for him. And I don't think that he has a problem diversifying. I think he just has 3 really good pitches and is fine throwing those 3 really good pitches.
So among the unknowns for this offseason is just the aggressiveness of Buster Posey being, in the main chair in San Francisco. I have a hard time, if he's going to contend this year with that roster, I have a hard time seeing them do that without a reunion with Snell. So I think Snell actually stays put on a longer deal with the Giants. Where do you see Snell going?
I've got him going to the Mets, Blake Snell to the Mets, and I know that I have in my universe Soto to the Mets, but we did point out that they have a large coffer. And what we do also know about the Mets is they have a real need in the pitching department. They are not only going to have to promote from within, work the back end of the pitching market, but they should work the front end of the pitching market too. And what I see is if they sign Soto, they don't have the, I think, intestinal fortitude to also sign Burnes in the same offseason. And if Fried gets any more years than Snell, which I think might be folly, but maybe that's an idea that people think he will age better, like you're sort of talking about, then I'd rather have the fewer years. So I'm taking Snell to the Mets because I need him and other pitchers, and I don't necessarily want to lose the draft pick with Fried if I'm already in the sort of losing draft picks part of the luxury tax. So that's what I got. Snell to the Mets.
Let's shift over to a few position players again. Again, we're working off of the roundtable rankings from The Athletic. These are not our free agent rankings, but it seemed like a good place to go just to order things based on the opinions of a few other folks that we tend to trust. And Willy Adames pops up here as the next option available. There's a lot to like with Willy. I think we've seen pretty good durability. His defense graded out better in 22 and 23, but it wasn't bad in 2024. We know there's a possibility he could sign and just not play shortstop somewhere. I think more likely he signs as a shortstop and then moves in a couple of years over the course of a long-term deal. One thing we've liked about him for a long time, 4 straight seasons now with a double-digit barrel rate, makes a lot of hard contact, and Willy Adames has kept that K rate at 25% each of the last 2 seasons. So I landed on the Dodgers as the Willy Adames fit. I was thinking about Max Muncy a little bit here because they have a club option for Muncy in 2026. So if they still like what they have in Muncy, great. It's 2025 plus 1 more year at a price they like. Beyond that, it's hard to imagine Max Muncy playing around the infield the way he does right now for the Dodgers. So the Dodgers could sort of kick the shortstop problem down the road a couple of years, move Adames to a different spot on the infield once they find a shortstop they like better, once they feel like maybe his glove erodes a little bit more. But this one stings, man. Willy Adames is a player that if he plays for your team, I think you like him. You can just tell he's generally liked by his teammates. It's weird to see guys beefing with him like we saw Jesse Winker in the postseason. So you kind of tick all the boxes where it's like there's power, there's a good enough glove to play short, there's not too much swing and miss, and you're getting what seems like an A sort of fit in just about any clubhouse.
Yeah, he's a top step guy.
Yeah, right. That's a great way to describe it. Yeah, top step guy.
He's right there. He's willing to represent for the team. He's willing to, and that's the only reason why Winker is beefing with him, because if you beef with the Brewers, you're beefing with Willy Adames. You know what I mean? Like that's how it ended up. But not that Willy necessarily started it. I don't think. I'd have to review the tape, but Winker did a lot of stuff and was in Milwaukee and was not necessarily liked when he was in Milwaukee. So there's a lot of backstory to that one. Other than the fact that I agree with you, Willy Adames seems like a leader. He's a shortstop that has, played for 2 small market teams. He's probably ready to take the big money from somebody and be in one of these big places. I did not maybe give the Dodgers enough in terms of players today because I thought, even though it says they're dropping down to 276, they could actually just, bask in the glow and stay at 276, which is still a very large number, and maybe not spend a lot this offseason. And in my world where the Yankees have lost out on Soto and they need to win some of these free agents, they win Willy Adames. I give the Yankees Willy Adames. And for similar reasons to you, where you're talking about the Mets, you're talking about the Dodgers having some issues with shortstop and center and some of the depth chart issues. Max Muncy you brought up. I think the depth chart issues in New York are worse. Even if they do sign Soto, you have to think, what are you guys doing about third and first? And is it really Ben Rice and Oswaldo Cabrera? You have 2 one-win players on a team that was just in the World Series. You're going to sign Juan Soto and go in with Ben Rice and Oswaldo Cabrera, or you're going to sign Juan Soto and other people? And that's going to start pushing numbers we haven't seen necessarily out of Yankees payrolls, So possible, but I think not probable. This is actually part of why I think maybe the Mets get Soto and the Yankees get the other players, because they need somebody like Willy Adames. You put Willy Adames at third base, and I get them winning a first baseman later, but more on that later. Then you change your depth chart and you're better in all the places. You're better around, you're a better well-rounded team. And I could see the Yankees deciding to do that. Willy Adames at third base, I think, gives you some of the best left side defense in baseball. And you have Jazz as either a center fielder or your second baseman. The depth chart starts to figure itself out. First baseman, you don't have to spend that much money on. I've got them getting a first baseman too. So I think this is part of the post Soto revamp. But we'll see. Adames, I think what you're getting from him, there are some issues with the strikeout rate. He may not age amazingly. Like, it's not like such top end batted ball stuff that I don't know that he would be your great first baseman. but I
No,
do
I don't
think
think
he's
he's ever
good.
that. Yeah.
I think he's good enough defensively where he can play third and second and still have defensive value through the course of this contract.
Right. It's, to me, I've said this before, it's a lot like the Dansby Swanson foray into free agency a couple off seasons ago in terms of what you're going to get. I think it'll age pretty well, but it's going to be a long enough deal where the end is a little bit tricky. That's how free agency tends to work. It's not a knock on Willy Adames. Let's talk about Alex Bregman. It's hard to imagine Alex Bregman wearing a different uniform. There's some free agents you're just like, nah, that dude's staying. That guy's an Astro. I've read they've made an offer. We don't know really what that offer is, of course. That's just not how it works. But where does he go if he leaves? Like, I think you have him going back to Houston. I think that's the most likely outcome. I kind of lean toward okay, how about the Mets? Let's think about the Mets and think about the types of players that certain front offices will value. I think David Stearns is going to spend a lot of that money. Maybe not all of it, but a lot of that money because he can. Why wouldn't you? You're as close as you were in 2024. You have championship aspirations. This is an opportunity to make your team a lot better. I don't think they have a quality third baseman on the roster. We've talked about the value of Alex Bregman's glove. I think that helps him age really well. And I think when you look at a guy that doesn't strike out a lot, plays great defense at a premium position, you are comfortable. If you're a guy like Stearns, if you're someone like that, you're saying, yeah, I trust this over the long haul. Because there's a lot of ways for him to still add value, even if the power wanes, even if moving into a ballpark that's not going to be as nice as Minute Maid is for the way his approach works, even if that kind of chips away at him a little bit. So I could even see like a Tampa Bay dark horse rumor coming out with Bregman where they're like, oh, the Rays are interested in Alex Bregman. It just seems like the kind of player that a air quotes smarter front office will generally want to be invested in for the long haul. So I have the Mets as the sort of next most likely place for Bregman to go, but I think your reunion plan with the Astros makes the most sense.
There's definitely been some decline already in Bregman's bat. He's 30 years old. He has not had an isolated power over 200, and the average around the league is up and down a little bit, but it's like 160. So he has above average power, but he does not have sort of no doubt power. And last year was weird because it was also the first year he did not have a plus walk rate. I think you would generally accept that probably bounces back, and he has a decent OBP next year, hits you 20 plus bags in most stadiums, and plays good defense. So yeah, it's one of those players that is kind of just a mid-level guy, but with the strikeout rate piece, I could see why the Mets would be interested. The Mets were middle of the pack in strikeout rate last year. So by adding Bregman, what you can do is keep your power. You're not adding a Luis Arias, like you're keeping your power up, but you're also improving your strikeout rate. You're moving Mark Vientos over to first. I have them losing Pete Alonso. So I think that would make a lot of sense. I just think that the Astros have very little to spend, and I don't see them spending it on a pitcher. And if they lose Bregman, there's not really a great option in free agency behind him to get any better. And if you look at the depth charts right now over at Fangraphs in terms of third base, the Astros without Bregman are 26th. So, taking 27th even, going from Shea Whitcomb to Alex Bregman takes them from like 27th to 7th. So that's too much of a depth chart hole for them to ignore, I think.
I tried to come up with the best ridiculous, how would they replace Bregman in Houston if he left? And here's what I came up with. How angels would it be to trade Anthony Rendon to Houston while eating 90% of his money, only to have Rendon crank out 140 games and just clobber them 13 times a season? Would that not be the most angels thing possible?
All of a sudden, Rendon is like, I'd like to play now.
Yeah. Like Houston's home, relatively speaking, right? Played his college ball at Rice. So, hey, stranger things have happened. But yeah, there's a sort of like a desperation of, if they lose Bregman, I don't know if there's an easy, smart fit for them to get even half of that production back from that spot. And that leaves them chasing somewhere else. I did see the Tigers listed as one of the the fits in the free agent piece on The Athletic. I thought that was kind of interesting. I think that would be a big splash for Scott Harris and company. Wouldn't mind that fit there either. So
I mean,
want to see if they kind of actually do that.
It's Josh Rojas, Donovan Solano, Gio Urshela.
It's some other kind of trade. Like they would have to go out and make some kind of move.
But in terms of assets for trade, they're not. Houston's not, flush with prospects that people want.
So maybe the Angels want Chas McCormick, and they'll send you Rendon, and they'll eat a bunch of the Rendon money.
No, you're going to make too many people angry with this one. Don't do it.
Oh, come on. Am I making anyone angry with this one? The Pete Alonso thing is interesting. You kind of hinted at this. Like, you think the Mets are going to lose him. I think because of all the other things they do, it does put them in a position where signing Alonso makes less sense. There's obviously a world where he stays. That's not out of the question. Just depends on how the other dominoes fall.
Vientos' glove is a little bit a part of this conversation. Vientos' glove is probably not that adequate at third.
It's not ideal. And you'd rather have the first base DH thing going. And if you do that, you really don't want a first baseman and a DH kind of locked into your plans. You'd rather have a little bit of float there, I think, with the way they're built.
And Starling Marte, is maybe should be a DH at this point. So you already have Marte and Vientos. And if in this world where they sign Soto, then you're like, oh, now we have three poor defenders, So they could almost be, let Pete Alonso go with or without Soto, with or without, improving the third base defense with your Alex Bregman pick. But Pete Alonso, on the other hand, represents for the San Francisco Giants something that they haven't had in a long time, which is a legitimate right-handed slugger that it's actually easier to hit home runs right-handed in San Francisco. Now, the only problem is that Pete Alonso has a little bit of an oppo swing. But we've seen with Elliot Ramos, we finally had a right-hander go, into the water this year in San Francisco. And so Pete Alonso can go in the water over there. He would lose some balls to Triples Alley, but he would also hit some balls over the cars into left field. And just generally be one of the more feared sluggers in Giants history. And I think the one thing that the Giants do want to do, is buy hitters, because pitchers are always going to sign there and always take a 1 or 2 year bounce back pillow type deal to pitch in San Francisco. So if they're going to overpay for anybody, it's somebody like Pete Alonso.
Yeah, go get the big bat. I like that fit there. I think in light of me sending Alex Bregman to the Mets, I've got the Astros swooping in for Pete Alonso. I think their corner depth chart is highly questionable. I think John Singleton is a good story, but I think you can add Pete Alonso to that roster, let John Singleton DH against righties, feel pretty good about that as your plan going in, and then maybe go all glove at third base if you get Alonso, right? If you replace Bregman with Alonso and get a glove first third baseman to sort of keep you afloat, maybe you are okay with that if you're the Astros.
That might make sense because their catcher is above average offensively most of the time with Diaz.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you've got an above average catcher, and then Pena's not a zero offensively either, so then you would just be like, hey, how many zeros am I okay with in the lineup? If I've got Pete Alonso at first, my zeros are at third and center. That seems like maybe I can handle that. The asterisk I have on that, though, is your zeros might be at third, center, and left, because right now Chas McCormick and Mauricio Dubon are at the top of the left field chart. So, maybe that's Yordan Alvarez. But right now there's maybe a little whisper of a third hole. And I would think when you get to 3 holes, that's one hole too many. I'd rather have 2 holes on my team offensively.
We thought maybe early last season, I think you, Britt, and I were talking about the Astros when they had that slow start. We thought, oh, wow, this is breaking down a little faster than expected.
Now we're seeing the warts. Now you're like, oh, now I get it. Wait, this is the great team. It doesn't look as great anymore.
Yeah, it can change fast. This is a pretty critical offseason for that front office, that ownership group, to sort of figure out what they want to be in these next couple of seasons. I think you've got a few toss-ups in this group of power hitters. It's a first baseman in Alonso that probably profiles more as a DH eventually. Anthony Santander and Teoscar Hernández kind of fit into this bucket as well. Santander versus Hernández might be more of a toss-up for a lot of teams, trying to think about who they prefer and what the better way to go long-term would be. I mean, Santander is kind of similar to Pete Alonso by strikeout rate, walk rate, average, and slug, just based on what they've done over the last 3 seasons or so. Where do you think Anthony Santander goes? Because I think this starts to open up that next group of teams that could be trying to get their most impactful bat available, since some of the very top options are just not going to be available to them.
You were saying about a toss-up. This is kind of amazing. I know that Teoscar Hernández is 2 years older than Anthony Santander, so that is meaningful going forward and what kind of deals they will get and so on and so forth. But last 3 years, over 1,900 plate appearances each. Teoscar Hernández, 8.3 Fangraphs WAR. Anthony Santander, 8.3 Fangraphs WAR. Teoscar Hernández, 123 WRC plus, where 100 is average. Anthony Santander, 124. So amazingly similar players, even though Teoscar Hernández strikes out more and has a little bit more bat speed, a little bit more batted ball oomph. Santander strikes out a little bit less, but might be just as bad defensively. They might both be DHs already. And this is a critical point because you then start to limit who would spend money on somebody that could be a future DH, and you limit yourself a little bit with Anthony Santander. I don't necessarily think the smarter teams are going to want to spend a lot of money. And we may find that with the qualifying offer and the draft pick in there too, that the Dodgers and Mets and Yankees of the world are not that interested in signing Santander.
Right. I have the Nationals landing Anthony Santander. I think the way I looked at it was, if you believe you could possibly make him a first baseman over time, they don't really have first base filled, but more importantly, they don't really have an obvious source of 500 plate appearances at DH either. So they could use him occasionally in the outfield. You could keep rolling ahead with James Wood, Dylan Cruz. Jacob Young could be a fourth outfielder that plays a lot in center because of his glove. And then Santander is, the other guy that rotates between the outfield and DH. And then you're getting more thump and you're kind of figuring out the defensive aspects of it later. I'm glad you had the Nationals on your list of teams that have some payroll. I think they're a team that's on the rise with that young core. So if they see a way to close the gap and become a playoff team right away in 2025, and they think power is the way to get there, Anthony Santander can do that, and he can do it probably for a slightly smaller deal than what Pete Alonso is going to get. I think, relatively speaking, there's going to be a little bit of a bump on Alonso, in part because of the higher end teams that are interested.
I'm doing an audible here last minute.
Yeah, I imagine there's some other stuff kicking around in your head. Where are you going with this one?
Well, I put the Royals, but two things happen. We started talking about DH, and I was like, they have a DH.
They're crowded, yeah.
And also, not only do they have sort of Salvador Perez, who's out there sometimes, and then Vinny Pasquantino sometimes DHs, but they also just got Jonathan India in a trade, who, Fangraphs rightfully, I think, puts at DH some of the time, is a player that is not amazing with the glove. So, and they do have Michael Massey at second. So there could be a crowd at DH, even though Fangraphs still has it as the 21st best DH situation. It's not one where I think that they're necessarily going to invest some money. The Diamondbacks, however, are 24th on DH. And what they have primarily at DH is Adrian Del Castillo, who's a catcher, Lourdes Gurriel Jr., who still has, I think, a little bit of defensive value, and then Blaze Alexander, who is at the bottom of the 40 man, like could get DFA'd at some point. Like, I don't know. They tried it, and I don't think it worked that amazingly. So I think that they would like to improve on that situation. And I have the Diamondbacks having a little bit of coin in their pocket. I don't know if they made the top of our list, but they have $24 million. And this is the kind of thing where they could improve their offense. I don't see them necessarily throwing more bad money after bad at the rotation, even though you could say, well, they need a pitcher. Do you think right now in Arizona they're like, yes, let's spend some money on a back end pitcher because it's really worked out for us the last 3 times we did it.
Mm. Yeah.
So I could see them being like, nope, let's just beef up the offense, throw Santander in the mix. He can replace Jock Peterson, but also maybe have a little bit more defensive value in the short term.
It's tough, though, because the D-backs are coming off a season in which they led the majors in runs scored, 886 runs scored. I just blows me away every time I see it. They were tied for third in WRC+. Jock Peterson is a free agent, so figuring something out to at least replace him. And Christian Walker's a free agent. Those are 2 important bats in that lineup that exceeded expectations last year. So you do have to at least reunite with one of those guys and then maybe bring someone else back in to maintain that if you want that strength to stay at that sort of level. So I do like that as a call.
Dave Cameron once told me a long time ago at Fangraphs, which resonated with me, which is that, when you are improving your team, one of the first instincts, and I still have that instinct, is to look for the worst part of the team and try to make it better. But that's not the only way to get better. You can just react to the market and decide, hey, no one's offering Teoscar anything more than 3 and 45. Like we can do that. We can jump in 350 and boom, we've got a better option than Jock Peterson, maybe for our team fit. So, and then you're talking about first base and stuff. So that, maybe they say, well, you're our DH outfield first base guy, and we'll see where you fit best.
Yeah, I just think players like this, players like Santander and Teoscar Hernández, free agency is not as kind to them as it probably ought to be based on their track records, because I think most people project them going forward as having steep drop-offs. And it's tough with Teoscar because you have this extra disappointing year from a strikeout rate perspective that he spent in Seattle in 23. He talked about difficulty hitting there. Even in a great year with the Dodgers, it's a 28.8% strikeout rate for a guy who's on the wrong side of 30. On the one hand, you're like, okay, there's more swing and miss here than there is with Santander. There's more swing and miss than there is with Pete Alonso. Then you look at the fact that Teoscar Hernández had the highest barrel rate and hard hit rate of that trio if you look over the past 4 seasons. So the quality of the contact is high.
Rate, which at some point looked like, his propensity to swing at pitches outside of the zone looked like at some point it would be something that would really hurt him in the long term, because there were times when he was running, like in Seattle's 38.5%. That's near the top. That's like near the worst chase rates. And then what happens is contact rate on pitches outside the zone really falls off in your early 30s. He's 32. He's chasing. You say, this is not a good fit. Well, last year he had a chase rate that was right around league average, just a little bit worse. So it's not necessarily the chase rate that's the source of swing and miss. It's the bat speed, the approach. He is trying to hit homers, basically. And maybe this is something that won't aid his badge leads we think. I mean, it is plus bat speed. It is plus power. I just think with the no qualifying offer now. He had the qualifying offer in Seattle?
Teoscar Hernández,
he had the qualifying offer. He got the qualifying offer. So I think with that, I think I say he comes back to LA. I don't think a lot of teams want to sign a guy that they think is a DH who's 32 and they got to give up a pick to do it.
I think the Dodgers are happy to go year to year with Teoscar Hernández, but I think because of Shohei Ohtani, you don't want to do the multi-year, longer-term commitment to Teoscar, because that's another guy that has to really, as much as you can, be taken out of the defensive equation if you really want to maximize what he brings to the table. I mean, maybe they think they can make him more passable, but they had a year and he still doesn't look great with the glove. But I see Teoscar fitting in San Francisco. I think it's similar to your thinking with Pete Alonso. Just I think they want some power. I think that's something they're going to seek out. I think you pay for what you can't develop. Power is something the Giants really can't develp right now, but that reunion with the Dodgers is solid. They tried this
with Jorge Soler to some degree, so it's like, they like this type of player. He is a little bit more of a pull hitter than Alonso, so maybe his spray charts fit better, and he will cost less, and we don't know how aggressive they're going to be. You're right.
Yeah. We'll try to go a little faster at the bottom few that we're going to get to on today's episode. Going back to pitching here, Jack Flaherty. Much?
If you're looking at Fangraphs right now in our YouTube feed, you can see that this is not a guy with above average stuff.
Right. And even with that, I mean, 2024 was great for Jack Flaherty. A 310 Sierra, 29.9% K rate. He looked like the guy that the believers said he could be. for the last couple of seasons when he struggled in St. Louis and then got traded to Baltimore. It happened. It's there. It's on the page. It's not going to be the same in terms of years or dollars as the other top-end pitchers go. This is clearly the beginning of tier 2. I don't think anybody would debate that. I think what stands out to me is a couple things. Flaherty has a 3.89 ERA over the past 4 seasons combined. I know health's been a factor, but the velocity, he has the lowest fastball velocity out of the Burnes, Fried, Snell group. I see kind of a right-handed Yusei Kikuchi where, for a variety of reasons, but health being a bigger one for Flaherty than Kikuchi, he hasn't been able to get the most out of his talent at various points in his career. But you have to worry about how the fastball velocity is going to age, right? It's already on the lower end of what you're looking for. Do you have enough confidence in that knuckle curve and in that slider to where Flaherty can keep being something close to a 30-30-30 guy with those 3 pitches, then maybe find an occasional fourth that he uses the guys on each side of the plate, like to where like you can offset what I assume will continue to be waning fastball velocity, especially in like years 3 and 4. Flaherty gets a 4-year deal. Not so much worried about years 1 and 2, more worried about years 3 and 4 being really bad.
Yeah, I just took a peek over at the new Stuff Plus numbers, and it has him a little bit higher, 100 Stuff Plus. So he would actually be a little bit better than that little graph on the right tells you. I do think that the added use of the curveball has been very interesting. With the Dodgers, he used the curveball more than the slider, and he has had this weird progression where it's been away from a pitch that was his best pitch. So I think he is a true 3-pitch pitcher at this point, and you have to think that advanced use of the curveball counts in his favor. And then I was looking around, and it just fits the Cubs for me in just their aura and what they've done in terms of they've been really active in the secondary market, and sort of the 5th to 10th best free agents. They've done this a lot, and I could see them, using needing a little bit in the rotation and thinking that this was actually the easiest way to spend a little bit of the money they've got and improve and not get stuck on the horn for too many years. Because I do think this could end up being a 3 or 4 year deal. And you would rather a 3 or 4 year deal in some front offices and with more question marks than a 6 or 7 year deal that you feel great about, and then in year 2 or 3 they get hurt. So I think that Flaherty to the Cubs makes some sense.
It's probably similar to the deal Jameson Taillon got a couple of off seasons ago, right? And if it goes well, I think that's a reasonable, like, higher end sort of outcome for what a long-term deal could look like. I think the Cubs make a lot of sense. I like that case that you just outlined. I'll throw the Nationals into the mix here. I think the Nationals make a lot of sense in part because Mike Rizzo has spent a lot more on free agent pitchers in the past to varying levels of success. I think at the downside, Jordan Zimmerman, obviously on the higher end, we could talk about, the other downside, Patrick Corbin. That's a short-term hit, long-term miss, but big hits on Scherzer.
Contract has been, and even the second Strasburg, they did get a title out of it. So
right.
I think he's okay with. I think that what he's shown in the past is I build lineups and I buy rotations.
Yeah.
In other words, and it has worked for them. So it's not. Why would he necessarily deviate too hard from that? In the meantime, I do think they've spent some resources and time and energy improving their pitching development to be like, hey, can I buy some rotation and also make some of my own? And I think they had some success with Mitchell Parker and DJ Hertz this year. They've got Cade Cavalli coming back. But if you think about a rotation that's Mackenzie Gore, Jake Irvin, Mitchell Parker, DJ Hertz, and Cade Cavalli, you can add a veteran to that. It would make everything better. If one of those guys has to start in the minors, that's fine. They can, if they shove, then they can come up and take somebody's job. So, I think I would say that in my defense, the Cubs back end is a little bit worse than the Nationals back end. I mean, you're talking about DJ Hertz and Cade Cavalli over there. The Cubs right now are going to run out Javier Hassad and Jordan Wicks, and I would rather have, according to Fangraphs. Now they have Ben Brown,
Horton. Yeah, they got some guys.
Yeah. So in both cases, what you're doing is buying a veteran to buy yourself time to make decisions on the kids.
Right.
You don't want to be like, oh, Cade Horton, you have to be our opening day. You have to be our 5th guy, as the opening day starts.
Do you think the Nationals, given the money they have, given where they're at, given their needs for a frontline starter, are actually like, at least contenders for some of the top end pitchers that we talked about? Could they be a team that splashes the money at Burnes or Fried or Snell? Like, I don't think that's out of the question. Like, we didn't pick them, but
Not at all. And again, my chart, that should be better, maybe a 3-year trend. Because if you look at somebody like the Nationals, like, okay, last year they spent 130 million according to Fangraphs. This year they have 87, so they have 40 million to spend. But 130 million from the Nationals was chump change for the middle of their run from 2016 to 2019. The average salary they were spending was 180 million. So they could look at 80 and be like, oh, dude, we actually have 100 million to spend. Maybe not in one off season, but between now and our peak, we have 100 million to spend. Yeah, let's go get Corbin Burnes. Let's just like drop Corbin Burnes on this team and see what happens. And yeah, I could totally see them being the mystery team on somebody.
that's the fairy tale world I like to live in. But Rizzo's done it before, so that's why I think it's not out of the question that they could pull something like that. There's a bunch of guys that sort of fit into this bucket. I mean, Sean Manaea came out 12th on the roundtable rankings of free agents. I think you could look at Manaea versus Flaherty and think that's actually a fair sort of toss-up. I think Eovaldi sort of fits into this group. Maybe Walker Buehler, based on what we saw at the very end of the season and the playoffs especially. And then Shane Bieber coming off Tommy John surgery. I think if you're looking at this cluster of pitching, I think all of these guys are probably on the table. In some ways, I think Sean Manaea stands out to me as maybe the best of the tier 2 in terms of floor, even though I think you could talk yourself into someone like Bieber maybe having the best ceiling if everything comes all the way back following TJ.
I think given their places where they are, what kind of contracts they're looking for, what they've done, where they are, health wise, I think Shane Bieber to the Giants makes too much sense because they're just, they're just the pillow contract capital of the world. For pitchers. I think that just makes a lot of sense. 2-year deal, like the one Rodon did, maybe with an option, maybe not, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3 with an option where he can opt out. That's the kind of Shane Bieber to the Giants that seems to make so much sense. Then between Manaea, Buehler, and Eovaldi, I think it's just really hard to pick. To some extent, their contract demands might make an outsized importance for what you want. I think with Eovaldi, you have a little bit of nervousness about the health because he's had 2 Tommy Johns already. You just feel like the next one might just be it. So I don't know that I'm giving him. Would you give Eovaldi 3 years? Maybe 3, but I'm not giving him more than 3. I think Sean Manaea could maybe ask for 4.
Yeah, I think Eovaldi, I'd say 2 with a vesting option for a 3rd might be the happy medium for me if I'm trying to manage the risk accordingly on that. I wonder if we can look at Sean Manaea and say that he has reduced some of the injury concerns from earlier in his career. Is he someone that would have an improving health grade over time? That 2023 season with the Giants, the usage was part of why the innings total dipped the way that it did, right? So, he comes off of a career high 181 and 2/3 plus some postseason innings for the Mets in 2024, but that was a
2019 since he really had some injury concerns.
Right, yeah, 179 and a third the final year in Oakland, 158 the one year he was in San Diego. So I do think there's something similar here. Again, I bring up the Jameson Taillon deal from a few off seasons ago. Like I think that's kind of where Manaea fits for me. I'd be comfortable at that level.
Some biomechanist driven teams, some teams that have advanced biomechanics and listen to their analysts there may not want to sign him. I do know that there's some concern dropping down your arm slot like that. He did it on purpose, so it wasn't necessarily injury related. However, there's been some research that sort of arm slots is higher stress on the body, and then the biomechanists will be the ones that have an opinion about how that arm slot relates to his trunk position at release. And so there is something there where some teams may feel that that's unhealthy, and some teams may feel it's great. So there's some advanced knowledge there that may come to bear when it comes to who signs him. The fact that he did this while with the Mets suggests to me that they're totally cool with the arm slot change. And like I said before, they need to be active at the top, the middle, and the bottom of the starting pitching market. So I've got Manaea going to the Mets and Eovaldi to the Tigers. So I think the Tigers do need to sign a back end pitcher, and I just don't know which one it'll be. And the Tigers may just try to be opportunistic. I know that Scott Harris, as a manager, had a reputation. General manager had a reputation for being sort of opportunistic and being the contracts guy. So maybe the Tigers just sign which of the three is cheapest, and that might be Buehler, it might be Eovaldi, it might be Eovaldi actually, but it might be Buehler. I kind of doubt that it's Manaea, so that's why I'll give Mets the sort of high-priced back-end guy. I'll give the Tigers the cheapest one, and I have no idea where Buehler is, but he's not in the top 15, so we don't have to tell you.
Yeah, we can save that for a future episode, but I have Manaea going to the Tigers. I think there's something about his approach that kind of fits what I think Scott Harris wants to do, adding some depth into that rotation. I think another lefty behind Skubal might be good. I think we're going to see a lot of Jackson Jobe this year, Reese Olson being healthy. You get your two big righties there. I think that gives them a little bit of balance and gives them some much needed volume, so they're not bullpenning quite as hard as they were throughout the second half of the season. Of course, some of that was from trading Jack Flaherty, so they could sign two. They could sign someone like Manaea and go into the bucket. I mean, part of the thing with Comerica is that it's another good pillow place. That's why they got Jack Flaherty, right? I think that's part of it, is you can be appealing to the guys that want to test free agency again a year from now, and you can take advantage of your home park. And if you got Chris Fetter and you believe in your organizational pitching development, I think you can pitch that really effectively to guys trying to maximize their stuff too.
I could see it being Buehler.
Yeah.
Because Buehler gets to go to a place that is up and coming, and maybe they can make him some pitches with what they would do in terms of his biomechanics or his pitch mix or whatever, and it would be a good park for him. Yeah, I could see it being Buehler with like a 3-year deal where you can opt out after 2 or something like that. You know, yeah, pillowy type deal too. I just don't think, even though I did declare San Francisco the pillow contract, I don't. Something about Buehler, Dodgers, he's a bit of a front stepper too, top stepper too. So I don't see him signing with the Dodgers. Maybe I could be wrong. I mean, money talks, but
money talks. I am going to throw Nathan Eovaldi to the Cubs. I think we're both in agreement. The Cubs are going to do something on the pitching side. You had him take Flaherty. I have him going after Nathan Eovaldi.
It was kind of interesting because he used to be this guy who threw a really hard, really straight fastball at the beginning of his career, and it was always worse than you expected given the velo he had and what looked like his stuff. Then he figured out how to sort of hide the fastball by throwing a ton of splitters and sliders, and he became basically a junker baller that also could throw 99. And then he got hurt again, and now he's been pretty steady as a guy who's a slightly above average velo, sort of 95s, but big pitch mix guy and kind of a command and pitch mix guy who can throw 96, and it's been good where it's been at, but I think he, given the surgeries on his arm, you don't know that you expect him to bounce back after the next one.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, the age, he's still younger than you think. He's 34, he turns 35 in February. But I think the per inning numbers could still be pretty good for Nathan Eovaldi. The other pitcher that fits into this bucket is Yusei Kikuchi. He's off the board. And to be honest, I wouldn't have put him on the Angels anyway. So I'm sort of grateful that he signed before the episode because I would have been
We've
wrong. Just would have been wrong. I mean, I think it makes sense. The Angels needed pitching, and I think we both like Kikuchi. I think the only thing from just a how does this go perspective is the Angels, especially with pitching, have not struck me as an organization that gets the most out of its talent. That is one area that they do not do well in. So whereas I was pretty excited about Kikuchi possibly landing with an air quotes smart team this winter, the fact that they didn't just gives me some pause about expecting much more than what we got in 2023, and good numbers like a below 4 ERA, kind of a league average WHIP, good number of innings, good number of Ks. I just don't know if you're going to get the best of Kikuchi over a full season the way that I was sort of dreaming on when free agency started.
Yeah, Kikuchi, for whatever reason, lost in the updated stuff numbers and is now more of an average stuff guy. than a really plus stuff guy. I don't know if that really fits what I believe of him, because you can see the strikeout rates have been really good for Kikuchi, and it's just been the balls in play. But stuff has something to do with balls in play as well. So maybe there is something about his pitches that leads to hard hit rates, and it's not just the command like we previously thought. So I think he'll still be fine. I don't want to say just because the Angels signed him, it's a bad deal. I think it's a great deal. I think that's the best thing they've done all off seasons. You can't just be like, well, they're a dumb team, so it must be a dumb deal. I mean, it's 360 for a guy that worst end is going to be the worst outcome for Kikuchi is he gives you 400 innings of league average kind of third or fourth starter for the next 3 years.
Right.
It's got to be worth $60 million.
100%. Yeah. I don't think the actual deal itself is the problem. It's more just like that fantasy ceiling. It's like, that's not quite what I was hoping for maximizing what Kikuchi could be. But I think from a real life perspective, it's yet another move the Angels made. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's fine. I think they're having a good offseason so far, which is not something people always say about how the Angels are operating.
They may be the early movers, though. I don't see them having a ton more money left, and I don't see them buying at the very top. So they just identified some people that made sense for their team and went and got them, and that might be it for a little bit.
I don't hate the get your guys approach, though, to free agency, especially if you're going to avoid having 4 or 5 other teams pushing throughout the winter for players that you like if you wait it out. Christian Walker, we talked about the Diamondbacks in passing a few minutes ago. I mean, a little cheaper potentially than some of the power bats we talked about earlier. I just see him going back to Arizona. Do you actually see him leaving? Like, do you think Pavin Smith is going to be the primary first baseman, like in a platoon situation for the D-backs in a world where Christian Walker goes elsewhere?
This has a little bit something to do with like the rankings, and I I'm not trying to disparage the rankings at all. They're great, and there's just so much good work in there. I just personally, I think Teoscar and Anthony Santander are more back end options than our rankings have them as suggestions. And I would have Walker ahead of them, because I just, his combination of plus walk rate, plus strikeout rate, and plus batted ball stats is something that's not replicated necessarily by Walker or Santander. You know what I mean? Like they each do like 2 of the 3 things, but Walker does all 3 of the things.
It's also not a bad defender either. He's not getting hammered in defensive value the way like even Pete Alonso does.
Yeah, and we tried to make Santander a first baseman. Walker is a first baseman.
Yeah.
So I could see Walker being more expensive than Teoscar Hernández and Anthony Santander, and I could see the D-backs being like, well, we're going to take a little bit less expensive one. And I think, maybe if there's a team that's out there that pays top freight, it's the Soto-less Yankees. Mm-hmm. And so they would have a need at first base. Christian Walker would be the obvious guy. And maybe it wouldn't be a very long deal because Walker is older, but I think by AAV, it would probably beat Santander, or it's longer and Santander is shorter, So either way, I could see the Yankees deciding that, doing something about first base is what they do post Soto.
All right, you got Walker to the Yankees. I've got him staying in Arizona. That leaves us with Ha-seong Kim as our last player for today's episode. Where does Kim land when the dust settles? We know the start of his 2025 season will be delayed coming off of shoulder surgery, but there aren't a lot of shortstops available, and at least you're getting a glove first guy who's shown at times some intriguing skills at the plate.
Yeah, I mean, we right now on there have the same thing. So I'm going to let you have San Francisco.
All right.
I'm going to let you have San Francisco. We already have some smoke, some rumors that they're interested. I think he seems like a Giants type player. He can play multiple positions. They said they want to move Tyler Fitzgerald off shortstop. He can play shortstop. He's a very good defender. And so if you start looking at the bottom of the shortstop group, in terms of depth charts, and the Giants kind of stick out as a team that wants to be competitive, will spend some money, and is in the bottom half of the depth charts. Other teams that stick out for me, though, are the Braves and the Brewers, as teams that could want to do something at shortstop. Now, maybe the Braves are just fine with Orlando Arcia hanging out there, but the Brewers just lost their shortstop. Even if they move Joey Ortiz to short, they could use another infielder, and the Brewers love defense. And so I could see them making a little bit of a splash. I think that Ha-seong Kim is not going to get a lot of money because the shoulder thing is definitely, you don't normally want to give somebody a lot of money or a lot of years coming right off of a shoulder surgery before he's played again. He's also not a guy who showed plus offense. It was more about his defense. And so I think he could be in the Brewers price range. So Brewers or Giants, I'm going to pick Brewers to diversify our attack here.
I like it. Yeah, they definitely need one more infielder. I think the way Joey Ortiz and Bryce Terang can play defense up the middle at a high level gives them some flexibility. Kim giving them another guy like that could make a lot of sense, especially at a discount. I think if the Brewers are interested, I'd throw the Rays in as a dark horse here, where, hey, like they could use a shortstop and he plays all over. And if they have another shortstop they like better later, Kim plays somewhere else, or they trade him. Lots of options to go that route. There was a trade over the weekend that we kind of knew was coming. It was already rumored to be happening before it happened.
We've been talking about this in the Discord for a while.
Yeah, Brady Singer ends up with the Reds. Jonathan India and Joey Weimer go back to Kansas City. I think that's fine for both teams, actually. I mean, I think the park adjustment for Singer makes him a lot less viable from a fantasy perspective, but the Reds get some innings. I think India being an OBP guy whose power wasn't as boosted by Great American Ballpark as I expected. I looked at the splits. I think it was a slight lean with more power at Great American Ballpark. I don't think that's his game. So I think his approach will translate okay to a less hitter-friendly environment. So I could see this being a win-win. Weimer's kind of a wild card because he looked better in center field than I expected him to in Milwaukee when they drafted him. I thought he was more of a corner guy, but once I watched him play center, he's at least a bench center fielder. So I think this is one of those trades that is fine for both sides.
441 slugging home for India, 381 away for his career. I think that's actually a little bit significant because my problem with Jonathan India is that I distrust OBP without SLG. And, we've talked about where he sits on the barrel rate curve. It maybe he's more Bregman than I give him credit for, but for whatever reason, and we've talked about this a lot, Bregman, pulls his fly balls, has a power approach. I mean, we're looking at ISOs here for the last 3 years for Jonathan India at 130, 163, and 144. If the park pushes that ISO down to 110, 120, I think that affects his OBP. I think then pitchers fill up the middle of the zone, and then his passiveness. Jonathan India is pretty legendarily passive. He's one of the lowest swingers in the league. 38% swing percentage is lower than Joey Votto's swing percentage most years as a Cincinnati Red. So if you fill up the zone against him because you don't respect his power, I could see his walk rate going down, his OBP going down, and this not really looking good. He also showed up as a sub 2 win player in full year projections. So I don't really like this trade from either side. I see these players as both kind of 1-win players. And they wouldn't be that interesting on the market. I guess that makes them a good fit for each other.
Yeah.
And they maybe just better fits on their new teams. I get that part. I get that the OBP has been pretty low out of the leadoff slot for the Royals, and they needed to improve their bats somehow. So I get it, I guess. I just, from the fantasy standpoint, I want shares in neither of these players going forward.
I wonder if this makes Chris Bubic back into the rotation a very likely thing, though, for the Royals, which could be nice for some very, very, very deep leagues out there if you took a late flyer on Bubic at the end of 2024.
And it also is worth pointing out that, if you've got Kyle Wright, Chris Bubic, Daniel Lynch, Alec Marsh on the back end of the Royals rotation, and you've got a hurt Luis Garcia right now in 5th for the Astros, that the Royals and Astros should be part of any conversation that we just had about Eovaldi, et cetera, that they may decide that they need to actually get some more innings out of their back end situations there and sign a starting pitcher again. And the Royals in particular are coming off a pretty legendary Lugo Waka off season, so they may feel like they can do this well and sign somebody for 2-3 year deal to come in and provide those innings that Singer was supposed to give them.
Yeah, it's a great point. And there's a ton of other free agents that are available that we could talk about on a future episode. So if you like the format, let us know on Discord that you dug this episode, and we can maybe make another one or possibly two if we have to get to the bottom of the free agent pool. It's fun to make predictions, fun to dig into these players in detail. You can join the Discord using the link in the show description. You can find Eno on Blue Sky at enoceris.bsky.social. I think they got to work on the nomenclatures over there. It's a little bit of a mouthful to throw that out there. I'm just dvr.bsky.social if you're looking for us over there. But Discord's a good way to connect. Drop us some questions in that mailbag. I saw a few piling up. We'll do a nice mailbag episode soon. It's a 1-episode week for us with the holiday coming up here in the States on Thursday. If you're celebrating Thanksgiving, hope you have a nice time with friends, family, having a good meal. Hope you enjoy the time with your family this year as well.
Oh yeah, got to spatchcock two turkeys. Got to rip their spines out and make a nice meal for people.
All right, well that's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you next week.
Thanks for listening.